We begin with Abraham, held by Jewish and Christian Israelis and Palestinian Muslim Arabs as their patriarch. Abraham, or Abram, as he is still known at this point, according to the oldest relevant written source, the book of Genesis, after journeying with his father, wife, and nephew from Ur of the Chaldeans in modern-day southern Iraq, and settling in Haran, modern-day southern Turkey, obeys God's command to, quote, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you." Genesis 12:1. This is about 2091 BC. Abram takes his wife and nephew and some others and travels south, coming to the land of Canaan, specifically to Shechem, then later to a mountain east of Bethel. A famine will make it necessary for a journey further still outside of Canaan to Egypt for a time, but he and his company will return once again to Canaan. Around 2054 BC, Abraham is tested, God requesting at first that he would sacrifice Isaac on a mountain in the land of Moriah, the very same location that would host the sacrifices in the temple eventually to be built there. Isaac is spared when Abraham is commanded to stop, and God provides a ram caught in a thicket instead. It is from Isaac and his wife Rebekah that Jacob is born. Jacob travels outside of Canaan around 1922 BC and returns after being commanded of God to do so 14 years later. After an encounter with God, God gives Jacob a new name, Israel, which of course will later be applied to the land that his sons, the tribes of Israel, will go on to possess. But about 1898 BC, one of these sons, Joseph, is sold into slavery by his brothers, being purchased by an Egyptian. After Joseph's rise to prominence in Egypt, a famine causes his brothers to seek aid there around 1875 BC, culminating in a reconciliation between they and Joseph, and then the invitation for the broader family to come and settle in Goshen, in Egypt's north. With the passing of Joseph and the succession of pharaohs, Abraham's rapidly growing descendants are put into slavery, and at one point firstborn males are seized and cast into the Nile to die. Moses survives, however, and is later called of God to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt and back into the land that has been promised to them. This exodus begins about 1446 BC. Due to grumbling and unbelief, both Moses and a whole generation do not themselves possess the land. With Moses passing, it is Joshua who leads a younger generation to cross the river Jordan and begin the conquest of the land of Canaan in 1406 BC, starting with Jericho and Ai. Victory over the Amorites and further conquering of lands to the north and south occur in 1405 BC. However, it is not until 1374 BC that Jerusalem itself is captured. In 1003 BC, David takes his place in the city as king over all Israel. 1000 BC, the Ark of the Covenant is brought in. But it would be for King Solomon, David's heir, to bring about the completion of Israel's first permanent temple on Mount Moriah, replacing the tabernacle, around 959 BC. It isn't long into the monarchical era of Israel before a schism manifests, the kingdom dividing in two, between north and south, beginning 931 BC. Through many years of persistent unfaithfulness, God uses the Assyrians to bring just punishment, primarily upon the northern kingdom, with their being taken captive beginning 722 BC. The southern kingdom, also largely not heeding prophetic warnings to repent, is taken captive by the subsequent dominant empire, the Babylonians, the first wave of exiles occurring in 605 BC. It is important to note at this point that this was not a complete removal of the Jewish population. A remnant remained in the land. But it would not be until during Medo-Persian rule that the exiles would begin to return to their homeland. In 539 BC, King Cyrus the Great issues a decree for those of God's people to, quote, "Go to Jerusalem in Judah and build the house of the Lord, the God of Israel." Ezra chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. In 457 BC, Ezra himself will return with more exiles. And in 444 BC, Nehemiah returns to lead reconstruction of the walls and gates of Jerusalem. In 330 BC, King Darius III is assassinated, marking the complete domination of the Macedonians over the Persian Empire, as led by Alexander the Great. Subsequently, one of Alexander's successors, Ptolemy, captures Jerusalem in 320 BC. Civil war develops between the Ptolemaic kingdom in the south and the Seleucids to the north, eventuating in the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes capturing Jerusalem in 169 BC. His decision to desecrate the temple by sacrificing a pig there in 168 BC, and then erect a statue of Zeus in 167 BC, were among the key moments that led to the Jewish uprising that would become known as the Maccabean Revolt, beginning 166 BC. In 165 BC, the temple was reclaimed, cleansed, and rededicated, the origins of Hanukkah. The Seleucid Maccabean conflicts eventuated in the gaining of independence for Judea for the Jews, so beginning the Hasmonean dynasty, rule under the successors of Judah Maccabeus, lasting from 142 BC to 63 BC, when the Roman general Pompey conquered Jerusalem. Rome installed a vassal monarchy as part of its governance of Judea, the Herods, starting with Herod the Great in 40 BC. 2 decades later, Herod initiates a major renovation and expansion project of the temple. In 4 BC, Herod the Great dies and rule is split between 3 successors. This is very likely the year that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. In 30 AD, Jesus is crucified by decree of the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate. 3 days later, followers witness Jesus raised again. 40 days later, they witness his ascension. And on the festival of Shavuot, or Pentecost, many pilgrims witness Jesus' followers speaking in tongues and preaching the gospel. Many at that moment believe Jesus is the Messiah prophesied by the prophets, thus the beginning of the church. In 70 AD, after 4 years of escalating conflict between the Jews and their Roman occupiers, the temple is finally destroyed under the military leadership of Titus. Temple treasures are plundered, and a number of surviving Jews are taken captive and sold into slavery. The funds from this contribute towards the construction of the Colosseum in Rome. In 73 AD, after a lengthy siege in which requires the building of a massive ramp, Rome ascends Masada to take the last Jewish stronghold. As devastating as these events are, however, those who remain in certain pockets of Judea and further abroad within the Roman Empire are able to retain or regain their resolve against their occupiers, with more conflicts emerging in 115 AD in what came to be called the Kitos War, and which lasts for about 2 years, with Rome once again ultimately victorious. The final major effort against the Romans would come under the leadership of one Shimon bar Kokhba. The main offensive begins in 132 AD, gaining much territory, but is eventually brought to a bloody end by 135 AD, with large-scale slaughter of Jews, or displacement, exile, or enslavement of Jewish survivors. Only a remnant remains in Judea, which is at this point renamed Syria Palestina, deliberately derived from Israel's ancient enemies, the Philistines. Moreover, Jerusalem is rebuilt by the Romans and renamed Aelia Capitolina, and features the addition of pagan temples. Also put in place is a near-complete ban on Jews from re-entering the city, apart from an annual mourning of the temple's destruction at what is today the still intact Wailing Wall. There is already a considerable Jewish diaspora before the revolt, but the aftermath of its crushing clearly lays the groundwork for a more significant scattering, such that any semblance of Jewish governance of the territory would not be noticeable for nearly 2 millennia. The Roman Empire continues to dominate for centuries to come. However, in 324 AD, Constantine, having earlier claimed to see a heavenly vision and convert to Christianity in 312 AD, having become sole emperor, makes Christianity the official religion of the empire. It is reported that Constantine sent his mother Helena to the sacred Christian sites in Syria Palestina. One such site was identified as the location of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. The emperor gives orders for a church to be constructed at this same location, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, being consecrated in 335 AD. It would not be until 614 AD that Jerusalem would once again come under the dominion of another power, this time the resurgent Persians. Some sources suggest they, while attacking Christian Rome, were favourable to the Jews, who may have aided in their taking of the region. In any case, it would take another 13 years before the Holy Land was once again reclaimed as part of what is now called the Byzantine Empire. Meanwhile, Islam emerges. In a struggle against the fourth caliph following Muhammad's death, the Umayyads assume leadership of the caliphate in 661 AD. And in this very same year, they conquer Jerusalem, thus beginning a centuries-long Muslim domination of Palestine. Jews still dwelling in the region and further abroad, who would also come under Muslim rule, were to varying degrees tolerated, though, as according to Islamic doctrine, were made dhimmis and thus paid the jizya tax for being non-Muslim, and could not attain any positions of significance. Also in keeping with what would become standard Islamic practice, that is, the deliberate replacement or use of sacred sites for the construction of mosques, by 691 AD, where the temple once stood, now stands the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock. In 750 AD, the Umayyad dynasty comes to an end, when it is overthrown by the Abbasids. Then, in 969 AD, control of Jerusalem is seized by the Fatimids. This is largely unbroken rule in this area until after the turn of the millennium, with power struggles occurring between competing factions in the Ummah. In any case, in response to Islamic conquest and aggression, Muslim domination of the Holy Land is interrupted by the Crusades, with the First Crusade achieving the taking back of Jerusalem in 1099 AD. Sadly, among the Crusader force were many who, in direct opposition to Christian doctrine, slaughtered many Jews in the midst of this bloody event. This grim admission, however, at least gives strong evidence of the sizable Jewish population still dwelling in Palestine at the time. Ultimately, the series of crusades that ensue end in failure. In 1291 AD, it is the Muslim Mamluks, having risen to power in Egypt, who launch a military campaign and take back any remaining Crusader-controlled territory within the Holy Land. And so the Jews who are yet enduring in the region continue to be subject to the varying degrees of toleration afforded them according to Islamic policies. Likewise, those many Jewish pilgrims travelling from abroad. The rise of the Muslim Ottomans sees the final change of Islamic rule in Palestine, the Turks taking control of Jerusalem in 1517 AD. Later, in 1897 AD in Switzerland, a certain Theodor Herzl leads the first Zionist Congress of the World Zionist Group, a major step forward in efforts towards the re-establishing of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The Congress falls amid what is considered the first Aliyah, or First Ascent, a wave of immigration from 1882 to 1903 of around 35,000 people, comprising mostly of Jews from Yemen and Eastern Europe, eager to escape pogroms and persecution. These early resettlers are much involved in agriculture and the establishing of kibbutzim, collective farms, and moshevim, community cooperatives. Herzl and others reasoned that Jewish presence in Palestine would only mean benefit for the local Arabs dwelling there. Indeed, Jewish agricultural development did improve both land and financial prospects, the rapid increase in Arab population being one key indicator to support this notion. It is important to also note that at no point are Jews displacing Arabs or taking land by force. Rather, they often paid more than the actual value when purchasing plots from the Arab sellers. However, from the first Aliyah and through subsequent Aliyah waves, the rapid increase in the Jewish population brings a corresponding rise in tensions, and deep-seated theological Islamic enmity towards the Jews is brought to the fore. Meanwhile, in 1917 AD, towards the latter days of World War I, Britain takes Jerusalem, thus ending 500 years of Ottoman control. This occurs only a month following the Balfour Declaration, wherein it is conveyed, On behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. In 1919 AD, Muslim leader Amin al-Husseini organises a series of violent attacks against Jews throughout Palestine. After the conclusion of World War I in 1920 AD, what was part of the Ottoman Empire is now made the British Mandate. This same year, al-Husseini is again the instigator of violence, this time starting Arab riots in Jerusalem during Passover, which includes mass looting, rapes, the injuring of over 200, plus the murder of 6 Jews. Many of the victims are children, women, and the elderly. In the following year, 1921 AD, soon after becoming the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, al-Husseini brings about more riots in Petach Tikva and Jaffa, resulting in the murders of 43 Jews. In 1923 AD, Britain grants administrative powers to the Hashemites of Jordan. Arab riots flare up again in the August of 1929 in Jerusalem, injuring once more over 200 Jews, many injuries occurring in their own homes, but this time murdering in total, when including those in Hebron and Safed, a staggering 220 Jews. Most significantly, in 1936 AD, following the death of Sheikh Izz al-Din al-Qassam by the British, the subsequent murder of 2 Jews, and then a 6-month Arab strike, what has become known as the Arab Revolt breaks out. The Grand Mufti quoted at this time as vowing the revenge of God Almighty. In the midst of this, the Peel Commission, 1937, advocates for a partition, what would effectively be a 2-state solution, with Palestinian Arabs to concentrate in Transjordan and Palestinian Jews to remain in the smaller section west of the Jordan River. But the recommendation only serves to exacerbate Arab hostility. The unrest is only finally largely quelled in 1939 AD. In the May of 1939 AD, a British white paper is issued, favouring Arab demands to limit Jewish immigration and land transfer. It also proposes a future independent Palestinian state. And yet, despite acquiescing so much, the Arabs actually reject it, which is purported to be due to mistrust of the British and the paper's provision for extending the mandate. The paper, of course, is devastating for the Jews, who are desperate to escape persecution in Europe, especially at the hands of Nazi Germany. In 1941 AD, al-Husseini, Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, meets with Hitler to discuss cooperation concerning their common enemy, the Jews. Nevertheless, the Axis powers of World War II are ultimately defeated, though not before the deaths of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. 2 years following the conclusion of the Second Great War, on the 29th of November 1947 AD, the United Nations General Assembly adopt the Partition Resolution, Resolution 181, designed to divide the British Mandate of Palestine in 2, with a state for the Arabs and a state for the Jews, though with significant religious sites around Jerusalem being placed into UN administration. The Arabs reject this, and the Arab Liberation Army, made up of both local and Arabs from neighbouring countries, launch attacks. The Haganah, underground Jewish militia, the Jurgen, and the LEHI respond. On the 14th of May 1948 AD, the State of Israel is declared and internationally recognised. Celebrations are short-lived, however, as what was localised conflict now escalates into a major war with Arab forces from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt, including Egyptian-led Saudi Arabians, who launch a full-scale invasion into the newly rebirthed Jewish nation. Israel fights alone through to 1949, where an armistice is finally reached. Egypt and Jordan are granted control over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and Israel gains territory that the UN had at first offered to Palestinian Arabs in the 1947 resolution. Approximately 700,000 Palestinian Arabs are displaced, either through fear of getting caught up in the conflict or cooperation via Arab leaders to temporarily step out of harm's way, or by being forcibly removed by Jewish forces. And approximately 850,000 Jews at this time moved from Arab lands due to persecution or the fear thereof. 1956 AD marks the year of the Suez Crisis, which begins when Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalizes the Suez Canal. Britain and France, who had control of the route until this point, form an alliance with Israel. A motivating factor for Israel is its desire to stem the influence and support from Egypt on Arab-Palestinian militant groups. Israel takes the Sinai Peninsula and advances toward the canal, but further progress is halted due to US Cold War concerns and fears of larger Middle East regional conflict. Egypt thus wins control of the canal. However, Israel gains access to the Straits of Tiran. 1963 AD. The draft constitution for the Palestinian Liberation Organization is created, the first official document to appropriate the term Palestinian to refer exclusively to the Arabs dwelling in Palestine. The Straits of Tiran become a flashpoint a decade later when, in 1967 AD, Egyptian forces mobilize in the Sinai Peninsula and close it once again to Israeli shipping. In response, Israel launches a preemptive strike, quickly devastating Egypt's air force and securing strategic positions. Egypt is joined by Jordan and Syria in the north, but Israel wins decisively, the war lasting just 6 days, and in the process takes more territory. In the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and most significantly, the Old City of Jerusalem. 1973 AD. Egypt and Syria launch a surprise attack against Israel on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. This conflict lasts several weeks, with the aggressors initially taking ground, but Israel is able to push back, resulting in a ceasefire. 1978 AD. The Camp David Accords begin, whereby US President Jimmy Carter brings Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin together to negotiate peace. An agreement is signed after 2 weeks, whereby formal recognition of Israel's right to statehood and allowance of its ships to use the Suez Canal and Straits of Tiran is conceded in exchange for Israel's withdrawal of forces and citizens from areas of the West Bank, allowing for self-government and a recognizing of the, quote, legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, end quote. The formal signing of peace occurs in the following year, 1979 AD. The US at this point also agrees to provide both countries certain subsidies, including military aid. Unfortunately, Sadat's decisions are not representative of broader Arab sentiment, and it costs Egypt 10 years of membership in the Arab League. It also costs the Egyptian president his life, as he is assassinated by Islamists in 1981. 1982 AD. The First Israel-Lebanon War begins after the attempted assassination of Israel's ambassador to the UK by a terrorist. Israeli forces launch a full-scale military operation, pushing back against terror cells in order to create a buffer zone to protect northern Israelis from ongoing bombardments launched from southern Lebanon. This operation lasts over 3 months. 1987 AD. The first Intifada erupts after 4 Palestinians are hit and killed by an Israeli driver. This is just the spark that lights the fuel of broader anti-Israel sentiment. The Intifada is otherwise seen as an uprising against Israeli quote-unquote occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The unrest continues through to 1993. 1993 AD. The Oslo Accords are arranged, wherein agreements are reached between the PLO, who for the first time recognize Israel's right to exist, in exchange for Israel's reciprocal recognition, plus withdrawal from certain areas of the West Bank and Gaza. Yasser Arafat is recorded later, however, as having referred to his part in the agreement in the context of Islamic justified deception and breaking of treaty, as exemplified by Muhammad in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. 1994 AD, a peace treaty between Jordan and Israel is signed. This marks an official end to a state of war that had heretofore lasted since 1948, and opens trade agreements, diplomatic relations, and working together on such matters as security, tourism, and water resources. 1995 AD, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin is assassinated by an Israeli nationalist extremist who is bitter at concessions granted through the Oslo Accords. 2000 AD, the Second Intifada begins, the spark being Palestinian outrage at opposition leader Ariel Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque still stands. This also lasts roughly 5 years, but is far more organised, intense, and bloody. It is also marked by numerous terrorist attacks, including suicide bombings. 2002 AD. In the midst of ongoing violence as a result of the Second Intifada, work begins on the construction of a security wall sectioning off the West Bank Barrier. 2005 AD marks the year of complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and the dismantlement of 4 Jewish West Bank settlements. The action sees the removal, largely by force, of approximately 9,000 Jews from their homes. 2006 AD. Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza vote for their leadership. In Gaza, Hamas wins overwhelmingly. A terrorist organization whose original stated aims in its charter draws heavily on Islamic scripture and tradition, quoting the hadith of Sahih Bukhari and Muslim that, quote, "The time will not come until Muslims will fight the Jews and kill them, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, which will cry, 'O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come on and kill him.'" And, quoting the Quran in the context of opposing Zionism, Surah 5, verse 64. "We have cast among them, the Jews, enmity and hatred till the day of resurrection. As often as they light a fire for war, Allah extinguishes it. Their effort is for corruption in the land, and Allah loves not corrupters." These are texts that obviously predate the creation of the modern state of Israel by more than 1,000 years. In the July of the same year, the Second Israel-Lebanon War begins after the killing of 8 and kidnapping of 2 Israeli Defense Force soldiers by the Iranian-backed proxy, Hezbollah. At the same time, this terror group launches a barrage of rockets towards civilian populations near the Israel-Lebanon border. The incessant rocket fire lasts for a month, hitting 6,000 homes, displacing 300,000 residents, and forcing more than 1 million to live in shelters. By war's end, 43 civilians and over 117 IDF soldiers are killed, and 4,262 civilians are injured. 2020 AD. The Abraham Accords achieve new relations between Israel and Arab or Muslim states, establishing diplomatic ties, complete with embassies and ambassadors, while aiming to develop cooperation economically, technologically, and culturally. The United Arab Emirates are first to sign, then the Kingdom of Bahrain, then Morocco, and the Republic of Sudan, though only the agreement with the UAE is registered with the United Nations thus far. 2023 AD, October 7, a large-scale terror attack from Gaza is launched primarily by Hamas, resulting in the deaths of approximately 1,200 Israelis and the taking of 251 hostages, the vast majority of whom are civilians. Hezbollah joins from Lebanon the day after with rockets. The Islamic militant group, the Houthis, begin firing their own missiles from Yemen from October 19, and Israel's military operation in Gaza begins on the 27th. In conclusion, Jewish presence in the land, now known as the modern state of Israel, has remained virtually unbroken since the time of Joshua, for thousands of years. Of course, empires and caliphates have risen and fallen, so control of the territory has passed through many hands. But the modern state must not be seen as some novel, brutal colonization. It is the result of legal immigration, legal purchase, and legal defense. It has also been demonstrated that Palestine is an ancient Roman invention, and Palestinian, a term appropriated strategically by Arabs, well into the history of conflicts that have occurred between they and their Jewish neighbours in recent times. Islamic enmity that predates any wave of aliyah or declaration of the modern state is the key cause of strife that persists, despite attempts to justify a two-state solution.